if you'd have offered me what's happened so far this season, I'd have signed for it, for sure. I think it all started from the summer. Had a really good summer. Went back and looked at a few of the weaknesses and just lifted the intensity with which I was training at during the summer. So putting a few more hard miles in. Not necessarily changing the volume or anything, but just the intensity at which I was training and how much I was sort of mentally applying myself to the stuff on court as well as the stuff in the gym made a bit of a difference. I think the thing that I've been asked the most is like, what's changed to sort of result in, the results that you've had. But of course, like, there's no one thing that you've just changed. You flicked a switch and then all of a sudden you're a better player or whatever it is. It's just like, I keep saying it's a lifelong, it's the fact that for so many years you've been refining your craft and your trade and paying attention to all the little things, and then all of a sudden you start to get, a little breakthrough maybe when you're not expecting it. So I look back to the summer for a lot of the reasons why I've started to do a little bit better. I spent a lot of time on court with Mohammed El-Shabaghi and learning from him and, just asking him questions, learning from him and the way that he trains, the intensity at which he trains. And that sort of opened my eyes to a few things and helped me to feel more comfortable playing squash at that level. And I think it's just experience as well is part of it. I've had a fair few years on tour now and sort of getting more used to being exposed with these top guys, on the big stages. And I think the first year or two of getting used to that, you can feel a little bit like a fish out of water, playing these big match occasions, whereas now it feels a bit more normal to me, if I can say that. And because it's quite easy when you go on court against a top 10 player to just go into sort of survival mode a little bit and just think, I don't want to just get thrown off court in half an hour. I want to sort of make a good go of this. So I think you can sort of get that sort of shell mentality to sort of go into your shell and be a bit defensive because you know what's going to come at you. Whereas I think it's so important now when I'm playing these guys that I do go at them and sort of take the pressure off myself. And I've started to do that more, and I think that's what's helped me to compete at that level more often than not, and so I think you get to a certain point when it becomes about subtleties and lots of little things that the top guys do better than everyone else, as opposed to just sort of one thing that obviously needs improving, so yeah, lots of little things that I've sort of paid attention to have obviously resulted in some good results, but there's still a lot to be done, don't get me wrong. As I said, had a good summer behind me. It's funny, the start of the season, there's always a little bit of uncertainty because you haven't played competitive squash for 3 months. So you're kind of thinking, what's going to happen, But I felt I was in a good place, and I think it was probably, I got through my first round against one of the French guys who was a solid player, and I sort of came through that fairly unscathed. And I played Gregoire Marche in the quarterfinal. And he was obviously the top seed. He was the man there. He'd won the tournament the last however many years. So I knew I was going into the Lion's Den when I played him. And in a funny way, it worked to my favour because it just took all the pressure off me. In fact, I think I might have been seeded higher. I think I was maybe seeded 2 or whatever it was. I think I might have been higher than him at the time in the ranking. But I knew that he was really the favourite going into that event because of how he'd performed there. In years gone by. So I just sort of said, I'm going into his backyard, so I'm just going to play my squash, impose myself and see what happens. And I sort of set my stall out pretty early in terms of the way that I wanted to play the match and come with a lot of intensity. And I managed to win that 3-love, and I think I got a lot of confidence from that particular match, because that was for me a sort of culmination of what had happened in the summer. A bit of a reward really early on in terms of winning a match like that, because I respect how good a player Gregoire is and what you sort of need to do to beat someone like that. And I think just going off track for a little bit, I've always had a sort of thing in my career of making a meal out of a lot of matches in terms of like early rounds, going sort of having a lot of 3-2s and 3-1s where maybe someone who would want to get higher in the rankings would be winning some of those earlier matches in a bit of a better fashion. So I'd always sort of take a lot out of my body, and then if I managed to get through those matches when I'd play sort of a top guy, I'd be pretty tired because I'd had 2 or 3 really hard matches in qualifying or whatever before, and that's another thing that my coach has said to me. You need to be getting into a position where you're getting off court a bit quicker against some of the guys that are lower down. Of course, no disrespect to them, but yeah, going off track. So anyway, I'd had those the first round of the quarterfinal in straight games, and then I played Baptiste, another young French guy who'd had a wonderful result the day before in the semi-final, and I came through that, and then playing James in the final. And I think at that point it was kind of like, whatever happens now, I'm happy because I've come here, I've put a couple of good matches together, and I'm playing someone who I admire and respect, in the highest regard in terms of James. We had a wonderful time together on the Gold Coast playing doubles, which is something that I'll never forget in my life. And being able to play a big final like that with him, I just sort of said, whatever happens today, I'm going to enjoy it, and this is going to be one of those occasions that we live for as a squash player. And in terms of the match, obviously it was an awesome match. It was an 11-9 in the fifth, and I managed to sort of come back and sneak it in the end out of nowhere, really. And I just sort of said to James after, I'm just thankful that I was able to play a match like that with him, because he's towards the end of his career now. I might not get to play him too many more times. Hopefully I can go on court with him competitively again, but I was just very aware that was an occasion that I would remember, and honestly, win or lose, I would have said the same thing in terms of, I'm just so happy to have enjoyed that occasion with someone like James, and to win obviously made it even better. But as you say, it was a great way to start the season, and I sort of started as I meant to go on, really, and it gave me so much confidence going forward, and we all know how much of a confidence and momentum game squash is. So it was an awesome way to start the season, and from there on I was just sort of enjoying what I was doing and just thinking, right, let's just see what happens now. So, and obviously since then it's been a good run. Yeah. It was really humbling for one, and very surreal for another. I hadn't thought about it too much, to be honest, until people sort of saying, the New England #1, because of course there's no official rankings. It's just going on sort of the PSA rankings and stuff. But very, very humbling. I didn't think that at this point in my career, being sort of 25 years old, I would reach that #1 spot. I thought if I continued to rise and improve that at some point in my career, maybe later on I would achieve that, but to achieve it at this stage was something very, very special. And I think for the reasons that you mentioned, in terms of those great names that have come before me, I've been learning from these guys for a number of years now. I've been fortunate enough to train with them. I train with Darren, obviously. We work together personally as well, and I go up to Pontefract and train with James when we've got a bit of time. I still go and speak to Nick, because he's another wealth of information, fountain of knowledge. There's so much that I have learned from them, and that I hope even when they finish their careers I can continue to learn from. Again, I speak about that time with James at the Commonwealth Games, obviously sharing a room with him and being quite close that week. I was able to, pick up some gems from him, especially from the sort of mental side of things. And I hope that I'm able to sort of continue the conversation after these guys have finished their careers, whether it's picking up the phone or going to see them or whatever else, because being able to train with them has been a great thing for me. And I hope that for the rest of my career I can continue to pick their brains about what they've achieved, because between them, we're talking numerous world #1 positions, world championships, World Series titles, Commonwealth medals. Everything in the game has been achieved by these guys, and that's not to be underestimated what that generation achieved. But also, I'm under no illusion that to be the England #1 is not what I'm trying to achieve in my career. Of course, over the last 10 years, there was probably a time when there was 5 English guys in the top 10. Which kind of says how strong English squash was and still is, but especially was in that period. But of course, the goal for me is to be top 10 in the world and be world class and challenging for those World Series events. So whilst that is a really special thing, I have to keep my eyes on the prize and look at the big picture, and that's to be a contender at the world stage. So English squash and the squash world are always asking that question about, where's the next English player coming from? And of course the squash world's going to talk about that, and rightly so. But for me, I came from nothing, do you know what I mean? I was just a 6-year-old that picked up a racket and learned to play in a leisure centre, and it was just a thing that I did with my family to have fun. So I came from nothing, and I had no expectations. So I've already achieved more than I thought I ever would. So for me, everyone says, you know, you're trying to be the next, you know, Nick Matthew or James Allstrop or Darryl Selby. I'm just trying to be the next Declan James, really. I just want to achieve my potential. For me, the only regret would be if I finished my career and I said I could have been better than I was because I didn't pay attention to this or that. That's why I'm trying to be disciplined and trying to leave no stone unturned and work as hard as I possibly can. And if I'm good enough, if I have it within me, then hopefully I'll reach, you know, most of my goals. I'll be happy with that. But I think if I put pressure on myself, it's not going to help the scenario because, you know, I'm quite a relaxed character. I'm quite laid back for the most part, and I think it helps me just to look at the big picture and look at the process instead of worrying about, you know, results and everything else. You know, so people are going to put pressure on, and that's absolutely fine. But for me, I just have to keep my eyes on what I need to do, and you know, I'm fine with that.